You there, Rod?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So I get to see your face and you don't get to see mine. That's pretty
That's
cool.
that's not fair. I know what you look like. Talking about looks, are you okay if I use one of your photos that I have on in our show notes?
Yeah, well, wherever. As long as it's, one of the good ones, which,
You know which I'm gonna use one of the ones from 10 years ago from Fans Waiting. That's what I'm gonna do.
oh, good. Make it 20 years ago.
Yeah, whenever it was. It was actually Livy is now 18 and she was only 1.5. So yeah.
Wow. It's just a little dub.
Yeah, she's now studying at uni.
Yeah. Katie changed to nothing.
Yeah, yes.
Wow.
Yes, the one whose nappy I changed on your bed. Yes.
Isn't that crazy? That's amazing.
I got your notes, and I've done quite a bit of research actually, which is unusual. But I have pages here, and mainly because you are such a pillar in our industry, and you've had such an incredible amount of influence on a lot of people. Just out of the top of my head, like there are people like Tim Chambers and Kylie Lloyd, Rebecca Hall, all the guys from Redditors. There's like David Jackson, Dean Stafford, Lee Douglas, Toby Scrivener. There is an entire firm that I tremendously respect that has basically come straight out of your circle of influence.
Well, what you've got to look at is not those people, but well before those people was the beginning of it for groundwater technology.
Yes.
Guys like Bill Lyons, Peter Murkov, Lionel Etheridge, John Ross. I could big note myself all day if you want me to.
You could name drop, right? It's always good when you name drop because I sometimes name drop your name in. I had a talk with Rod, I do. But that's what you said, groundwater technology, because that's when I was working in 1993. I started working for OTEC.
Correct. Yeah.
And that was a firm founded by a bunch of really smart shell engineers.
Yeah. I know them all. I knew them well. Matthews.
Jeff Matthews, of course. And hey, Charlie Barber.
Correct. Yeah.
And Rick Schofield.
Even Belinda Incan, who worked with me, worked at OTEC as well after she left groundwater technology.
And I remember being a complete novice at OTEC, but these guys had come over to Australia, had seen an opportunity because they had cleaned up all these service stations for Shell in the United States, and they had seen that Australia
goddamn Texans, how dare they?
I know.
How dare the Texans? They could take over my market.
So they came in and spoiled your party.
So it's the only time we ever got competition. Well, in fact, I remember being so arrogant that Jeff Matthews came to my office in Kingsgrove and said, well, and we had our laboratory, which we call Groundwater Technology Environmental Laboratories, and Jeff had the hide to say he'd like to use our lab. And I told him to get out of my office. How dare you? And it was pretty silly of me because we could have got a fair bit of revenue. And then they had Rick Schofield there too. Rick with a silent P.
Oh, please. I remember that meeting. I wasn't there, but they came back to the office, Rick and Jeff. And they said, well, we met with Rod Harwood from Groundwater Technologies. And yes, the word arrogant was used. And also, I remember them saying, man, this guy, he is really smart. And that's the first time I heard the name.
Must have been someone else.
No, that's the first time I heard your name. It's quite interesting. So yeah, so we go back a long time. So groundwater technology, I'm talking 1993, but you brought that over from the States, is that correct? In 87.
So in 1987, I was working for the Department of Water Resources. So I was working in Dubbo as a hydrogeologist in water resources as a government employee.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I used to do a lot of rowing and I had my own sculling boat. So I took it to Dubbo and I was going to train really hard on the Macquarie River, but it was like a sine curve. So I couldn't I couldn't train properly because the bloody thing was a tortuous pathway.
Yeah, how dare it? How dare it meander, right?
Yeah, and so I got headhunted by this mob in Boston, Groundwater Technology, asked whether I'd want to start this company that's involved with contamination. And I thought, oh, you beauty. I can get back to Sydney and I can start rowing straight again. I'll get out of my boat and I'll be a good rower. But that boat never got wet because we just got so busy. I guess I was there from 87 to 97. I was the first person. We had 120 people when I left after 10 years. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, and Auckland offices.
Wow.
And our main competitors were you guys, you and those rotten Texans that came over to take my marketplace.
Yeah, yeah. The cake was so big, and still is, that there was enough room for both of us.
In fact, BP made contact, and their engineering manager, Trevor Nichols, said, we've been told by London that we have to assess all of our bulk oil terminals and distribution sites in Australia.
Mm.
And he said, are you up for it? And I was one person. I said, yeah, sure. It's only 23 terminals. That's okay. I can do that. Well, we can do that.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, look, I don't have time for you to write proposals. I just want you to get on with it.
Ah, the glory days.
So that was the beginning of groundwater technology. And my Boston people taught me a few lessons because I'd come from the government. We did everything for free. And then I was invited to give a presentation to the engineering conference for BP in 1987. And a 1 hour lecture. And my boss, whose name was Barbara Linkowitz, a really good boss and mentor, said, you can do that, but you'll charge them $10,000 for that 1 hour lecture. And I was devastated. How dare I charge that amount of money for 1 hour? And that was the lesson I learned. You can't drop your prices on everything you do, because if you drop your price, people don't value who you are. So that was my first lesson, I think.
That's a general problem that engineers have, people with an engineering mind, and I'm one of them. We say you develop a piece of software and you charge a client $100,000 for it. 2 months later, another potential client comes along and wants exactly the same thing with slight changes to it. The engineer immediately thinks, that's a piece of cake. I only need to charge $20,000 for those changes. And instead of saying, I will charge the guy 110,000 because, right? Because he came to the right person. And an engineer thinks of how difficult the task will be and will charge for the task. And an engineer generally doesn't charge for the value that the engineer produces. And that's exactly what you just said.
Yeah, yeah. And the other lesson I learned from my business or marketing colleague who has worked with me for over 30 years is to say, if the client comes back and said that's too expensive, you say, well, I can do less tasks, but I can't change my hourly rate. That's where my profit is. So instead of doing tasks 1 to 10, let's do 1 to 6, and you'll get a cheaper job and I'll still maintain my margin. So I think those things are pretty important from a business perspective, as distinct from anything else we want to talk about today. There are a couple of lessons that I've learned.
Yeah, I highlighted that comment when you sent over the things you want to talk about. That is bold and in red. And to be perfectly honest, I had heard it before and I had forgotten. And it's so good. Well, thank you for that. This is, if clients want a cheaper proposal, limit your tasks, not your hourly rate. That is so good.
So thank you for saying thank you. So look, my history, I hate talking about myself. So my background's in hydrogeology, water resources. That's still my passion. I was lucky enough to get into this game in 1987. Stayed with groundwater technology for 10 years. 1997, went to ERM, stayed there for 6 years, set up a group in Asia as well as Australia for ERM, and was a senior partner and in charge of a director of the offices in Indonesia. That was good experience, and I still hold ERM in great esteem as a global company. No, ERM they're in the top 7 or 8 global environmental companies, particularly in ESG and contaminated sites. So they've probably got, I'd say, 60 or more offices around the world. Good company. I left them and set up my own first company called Responsive Environmental Solutions. We only traded for 3 years and we got bought out by WSP. I stayed at WSP for a couple of years and then set up another company called Environmental Strategies, and that traded for 9 years, and then we got bought out by Arcadis in October 2016. I stayed for 2 more years and then set up this one that I'm running currently, which is, very animated name called Harwood Environmental Consultants.
You're officially retired.
No, I'm retired from auditing. I'm still doing stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I haven't really retired. It won't be long, but
You said that for the last 10 years. Come on.
my last audit for New South Wales EPA was number 457. Now, surely that's enough. Really? If you had any personality before you started auditing, you'd have none by the time you finish. We were lucky in the early days. We did a whole lot of petroleum-based technologies, in situ cleanup stuff, above ground bioremediation. We even did in situ cleanup of groundwater, soil vapor extraction in 1989. Stripping of volatiles around the same time after we'd pumped it. We were the first company in Asia to do air stripping back in 1994, and Bill Lyons was the guy that did most of that.
Sorry, Rod, I think you mean air sparging, right?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, well, I think BP decided that groundwater technology was taking too much of their money, and they decided to internalise their contaminated site business. And then people that we know would then go to our sites and observe what thread or nut or compressor we'd use so they could do it themselves. We then did multi-phase extraction, moved on to cleaning up metals in groundwater, which was a big step forward because people thought that we couldn't clean up metals. But you can, and we use geochemical stability modelling, Freak and other things to actually work out how we could change the chemistry of sites impacted by zinc and lead and other things. And we successfully cleaned up a large number of impacted sites with metals. Then moved on to chlorinated solvents and looked at modelling, looked at using in situ techniques there, looking at injecting helicocoides into groundwater systems to break down the chlorinated solvents. And in very recent times, using field GCs on sites rather than sending samples back to a laboratory where all the volatiles are lost. We worked in a couple of sites where we got really interesting data on the vapor plumes from chlorinated solvents. So yeah, I've done some stuff technically that I've been proud of. I think I've been more proud of working with good people and getting a good buzz out of helping people or being helped myself by other people that I've looked up to.
Well, that is one of the things that I heard from numerous sources when I did my research and asked people around that I told them I'm going to talk to you. And and what they thought of you, and what if they have anything to say. And one of the big ones that comes out of that is generosity. Your generosity. Everybody mentioned that, and they said that you helped them develop successful careers, and the second thing that you taught them, that respecting clients and putting a high value on relationships with clients is another thing that people really learned from you.
Yeah, well, I think the sharing, when we grew companies and then sold them, those people that made the difference, they got a large amount of the financial reward as well. So every time we sold a company, 50% of that sale went to the other people, and I picked up 50% for myself. And my wife in particular would say, "How silly was that? You're giving all this money away." But in actual fact, I couldn't have grown those companies unless those people were so good at what they did. So I don't regret the many millions that were given away to people that sometimes say I've done okay, other times say not. I'm going to learn to listen in this podcast because I've seen a couple of other ones. One you did with Liz and co.
You're talking about the podcast with Liz Wild, Under Duty to Report, right?
And I think it's important that I listen and not talk.
No. Hey, no, not at all. It's like just people don't turn in to listen to me or James. They want to hear what other people have to say. So by all means.
So one of the things you asked me to do, give a relatively funny story. Well, this one's sort of funny, but sort of not.
Okay.
And this is in 1989, and we've only been playing in this game for a couple of years. There were people like Ian Swain and Roger Parker and names like that have only just started in the game. And myself and a colleague were drilling at a petroleum site in Kingsgrove.
Yeah.
And it was really important to get monitoring wells in as close to the tank pits as you could. And I worked out with a really good driller how we could put monitoring wells between two underground storage tanks and not put a hole in the tank. We studied this for at least an hour and then came up with a foolproof process of putting this well in between two 25,000 litre gasoline tanks. So I was out in the field with a wonderful environmental scientist, and we found we were really lightheaded. We were drilling away and we were laughing and having a great time. And then the other person went across away from the tank and started vomiting. And then I looked up the health and safety plan, which said exposure to benzene, elation, happy, then you vomit. The interesting thing is that the client, who was Esso at the time, so we can talk about Esso, so they don't trade anymore in Australia. They said, "You guys would put a hole in the tank."
Oh.
And we said, "That's impossible." So we drove up to Newcastle to a place called Tank and Pipe and observed this big score mark all the way through the tank. So this is an example of I can make mistakes, and I was so arrogant that I thought that I had a foolproof method, and I was totally wrong.
So hang on, did they pull the tank so that you could see it?
Yeah, they pulled the tank, because it had a hole in it.
But hang on, these are your underground tanks. They have quite thick steel walls, right?
Yeah.
So you must have come in with the auger on the edge. Didn't the auger just bounce off?
Look, I could go into the technical detail of why it was foolproof, but I think there's not much point going into it because it wasn't.
Obviously, it wasn't, right?
So, but the silly part about all of that is that I thought I'd never, ever get any more work with Esso. And it was almost like if you admit you're dumb, sometimes your clients are nicer to you. So we ended up getting all the cleanup work for all the Esso sites that were sold to Mobil. And that amounted to 30 or more in situ cleanup sites for Esso, which was ranged from terminals to a refinery and their retail outlets. You can go really bad but sometimes you might still do well.
Did they in any way make you pay or make you reimburse them?
No, not at all. They didn't. And that was the attitude of the industry in those days. Litigation was not high on priority. It was sort of like, oh, these guys are a bit new. They reckon they know what they're doing. We'll give them a shot.
I did not. How come we have been talking on a regular basis for over 20 years and I have not heard that story? How can that be?
Well, I figured this is my chance. I'm almost on the way out the door. And you did give me a few guidelines to say, well, tell us a couple of funny stories. Well, not too funny, but at least it exposes things that I can do wrong.
Drilling into I always was of the opinion that's close to impossible, because they are you have to really, really, really insist, because they're steel tanks.
Yeah, look, I think you're totally right. And the reality is you are right, because we didn't do it well. We put a hole in
it. I heard of you in 1993, but I met you in person when you had just started at ERM in your St. Leonard's office. That was in 96. And
was it that early? Was it
97?
Yeah. And we were talking about Wattle Street.
Yes, well, that's a side effect, but I was working for the State Rail Authority at that stage.
Of course, yeah.
We were assessing hundreds, I think 400 to 500 sites across New South Wales to sell them to finance the Olympics in 2000. And yes, I remember visiting you, and Kylie and Rebecca were there as well. Kylie Lloyd and Rebecca Hall, auditors themselves now.
Yeah, Rebecca was there. I'm not. Well, Kylie may have been there, but she didn't work with the RM at that stage.
Okay, then then I'm wrong. Yeah. That's okay. So Rebecca was.
Sorry to be a pedantic old man.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
You're running the podcast.
Yeah, it's okay. Make me look bad. That's all right. So when did you become an auditor first? When was it couldn't have been much earlier than that, because the auditor scheme was only launched.
1997 is when I first started auditing, and on that Wattle Street site, I was deemed not to have paid enough attention to asbestos. And
really, in brake shoes, is that the problem?
With the brake shoes, and
well, hang on. We were working on. That was the site you and I were working on the chromium impact. Is that right? And I learned from you the difference between trivalent and hexavalent chromium. That was the main issue on that site.
Yeah, it could be. But the main issue for me as an auditor was that we didn't define the potential asbestos impact in enough detail.
Yeah. Well, look, that's a history we share, because I was no longer at State Rail in 2000. That project had ended.
Okay.
And one of the things that I do remember is that we were working on it and there was a deadline for it. And I'm bad with deadlines, and rumors say that you are as well. So suddenly I needed that. I really, really, really had that deadline had crept up on me, and I needed that audit statement. So the day before, I called, hey, by the way, where is that audit statement? You say, what? I haven't even, I didn't know it was due, blah, blah. And I said, whatever you do, that audit statement I need. So it was poor time management on my side. And it was only years later that I heard that particular site had actually caused a certain amount of a stir.
Look, I think it's true to say that we didn't focus on asbestos as much as we should have in those, pre-2000. We're obviously a lot better at it, although we're not particularly good at it.
No, we're
particularly on the waste side. So it's nice to see the new waste criteria coming in, where we're actually looking at it, at least at recycling facilities.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was sort of a wake-up call. You have wake-up calls in your career. That was one for me. to realise that I wasn't, I just breathe and go to sleep like everyone else, and I'm not infallible. That's for sure.
And that sight and the little stir that it caused, how did that affect you personally, and what effect did it have on you professionally?
I'm a very emotional chap. You mightn't think so. I might give you the indication that I'm I'm an old rugby player, so I'm a tough guy. I'm made of bricks and stone, but I know it affected me quite a lot because, I'm an egotist and a narcissist. So how dare anybody think that you're no good? So, yeah, that was a significant um, impediment on my ego. I'm much more philosophical about that these days.
Well, it's always easier in hindsight than you. What did you take away from that? What did you do differently in the future?
In those days, the guidelines were quite new.
Mm,
Professional judgment was a really important part of what we did. Having good skills was important for what we did.
mm,
But that was probably an example of focus on some guidelines. We had the 1996 ANZAC guidelines at the
yes.
time, and we had, it was pre-NEPM, but it gave EPA the chance to come back and say, well, we don't think you followed a guideline.
Mm,
So the lesson is, in spite of the fact that in some cases we don't agree with guidelines, when you're an auditor, you really don't have much choice. So professional judgment is a really good thing, and it should be born out of capability earned from understanding the science of what we do.
mm.
I would like to say that there's been a change in how we've done work over the years. In the early days of this industry, in my opinion, there was a very strong bond between EPA and consultants and auditors. And it was a very good avenue to go in and discuss a site with people that you respect. I'm not saying we don't respect the current crop, but we were able to go in and talk about a site, talk about the strategies and we're going to deal with it, and walk out of a meeting with a pathway forward. My opinion these days is, yeah, we've got a whole heap of good guidelines, which we didn't have in the early days, but we're also lacking in our ability or propensity to discuss issues. And in fact, there's the potential to simply get discussion around how you didn't meet the guideline, as distinct from talking about a technical solution on a problem.
Oy.
That's an outrageous statement to make from an old man about to leave the industry.
Oh man, and it hits one of my hot buttons for sure. This insistence on tick box styles reviews of environmental reports. Did you do that? Did you do that? Did you do that? Without then entering into a discussion whether your conclusions, what you came up with, make any sense. You can have a perfectly, wonderfully compliant report that is utter garbage.
And that's true. Yep.
The discussions have, as you said, shifted away from do the conclusions make sense and are they scientifically backed? It goes away from that into an area of have you ticked certain boxes? That's so bad. Now, auditors sit in that, they sit in there in a kind of a no man's land, because one of the roles of an auditor is, hey, did we comply with the guidelines? I understand that. But you guys are the creme de la creme. You are the QCs of our industry. And one would think that you are given enough leeway and enough respect to say, well, in this case, we didn't do it that way, and that's perfectly fine. Because we know we're experts.
Yep. Now we've got a limited amount of time, and on the same theme, because we're now guideline focused and particularly with AI and chat. I can give you a 150-page report tomorrow in about 3 hours, which will address all the guidelines.
Mhm.
But we've got a very large industry now, and a large number of our young graduates are actually environmental science graduates, and they're not geologists or chemists or biologists, and there's a steep learning curve. I have great respect for the young people because they're much better at computer literacy than I am. But I review reports today that are actually worse than ones that were written 30 years ago because there's insufficient rigor in the important aspects of work. And so, in fact, Jackie Wright says a similar thing in that we used to train everybody back to basics, which is a very important part of what we all believed in the old days, of making sure that the people came through with appropriate qualifications of understanding drilling and water sampling and models and CSMs and all that stuff. It wasn't looking at a CSM guideline and making sure we've got the source receptor pathways in there, but to actually understand the site, and by understanding that site to clean it up or determine the risk of it. So my advice at the moment to companies in general, if you want to stay in this industry, go back and train your people. Go back and train them how to be good geologists if they didn't do geology. Train them how to understand chemistry. There's not enough training going on. And even though we've got nice guidelines and lovely looking reports, there's a whole lot of them that don't have much substance. So I'm almost at the point of saying we now probably need an external course for the young kids, a bit like UTS, CSARM or whatever, so that they can sit in a workshop, understand unified soil classification, do an exam in it. You know, in my old companies, we'd have a thing called a skills matrix. There'd be 15 things on it. A kid couldn't do any of that work on their own unless it was signed off by a senior person to say they were now competent. My opinion is that we've lost our ability to do that. And I think Jackie said similarly, and I recall them myself, we did back to basics training. We had these environments where we could all sit around together and discuss technical issues. There's no time for that now. We're too busy generating a report at least cost. But with that least cost also goes least useful report to our clients. So my bit for the young kids is get back to basics, make sure you understand it, get onto the mentor program that's in the AusNZ CMVP. Be mentored by somebody you respect, and you'll learn your craft or your trade or your profession much better than a number of your peers currently do.
All I can say is I agree wholeheartedly. How to improve the quality of the products we produce in our industry is a tough issue, because there are commercial pressures on one side and it is so ever so tempting, which is send minimally trained, relatively young and inexperienced people into the field, because that's what they can do, that supposedly, and you can say in your report that they were adequately trained because you've given them a cut and paste version of some guideline that you have put your letterhead on it and say, that's our standard operating procedure.
Yeah, but it's a lot more than that.
But that has nothing to do with producing a quality. So if you read the quality control section in our reports, that is a scientific embarrassment. That is a quality theater. That has nothing to do with quality control, and we are missing the big picture of producing quality, and that starts and is one of the most important things that starts in the field, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Now, I am lucky or unlucky, it depends. You look at my bank account, that's probably because it was unlucky, but I have always worked for small companies, so I have been in the field and still am an awful lot. And I have tremendous problems in getting my head around a report on a site that I haven't been there.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much more to a site assessment than looking at lab reports and the geology map.
Yeah, but you know what? If you mentor that person, if they've been through your skills matrix program,
Mm-hmm.
and you trusted them in the field, then you'd employ them and you would review their output. So it's a matter of actually doing work for a lesser price. We're in a small company, therefore we're going to be cheaper. Well, you know, that's not the case. It shouldn't be the case. And I guess it's up to us as senior principals in companies to try to maintain the price and the quality of what's done. So, you know, I guess the challenge for you is to make sure you're happy with the people that should go out in the field for you and not for you to have to do it.
Yeah.
So, as I said at the beginning, if you keep the prices high and the hourly rate high, you don't go out backwards. There's only one way to go when you drop your price, and that's to go out backwards. It means you can't do quality work, you can't train your people, you can't give them salary increases because you're not making enough profit. You can't send them to the next alga workshop because you can't afford it anymore.
Mm.
So our industry's big enough. There's enough clients out there. I'm not saying you do this. It would be, and it's not the case. You don't do that, but it's not. There's no reason for us in our industry to compete on the basis of price. We should never do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think. Now it's easy to say and harder to do.
It is because, you know, the financial pressure, of course, comes through the tendering process, and the only way around it really is that you are working with a set of clients who trust you.
Yeah.
And then they know what they're getting, and you know who you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And you have a good, great relationship of trust that comes over years and years.
Yeah.
But most of the time we know what happens. Hey, give us a price for this detailed site investigation in accordance with all relevant guidelines. That's what lands on your desk.
Or you can be like BP in 1987 and say, look, I've got 23 terminals to do. I don't have time for a proposal. I trust you. Go out and do it.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, and it doesn't mean that it can't happen today, and it still does happen today. You know, it's a matter of settling with people you trust who trust you, and then the business relationship is fantastic. There's nothing better. Like personally, I've got long-lasting friendships with the number of my clients, you know, from you know, large terminals, proprietary limited, and Vopac and all that stuff, that I still have beers with today because we work together and we trusted each other. So we need to be developing trust, and the senior people and everybody needs to have not just discussions about the report, but how can we solve your problem so that your life's easier? You know, we don't really write technical reports. That's just the facade on the front cover.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. Rod, thank you for your time. It's a rarity. You played hard to get at the beginning. You didn't want to be on the podcast, but I appreciate you taking.
Well, that's what you do. You know that. You played that game. If you say you want to do it straight away, they don't value it, do they? No, you know, I thought I was pretty special, but I've seen so many of these podcasts that you've already done, and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's taken them forever to even want me to do it. So
no, James and I, we are very proud of what we have created here.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. And look, the duty to notify with Liz was good.
Yeah.
I'm actually learning things by listening to the podcast as well. You know, you think you know everything, but you actually don't. And when it comes to notification, it's interesting because auditors can do a tier 2 or a tier 3 risk assessment to say that site that doesn't meet trigger concentrations is okay. I'm going to pass it because it's got a risk assessment.
Yeah.
But the duty to notify legislation doesn't allow you to do that. It says if it's over a trigger concentration, you'll report it. So there's this great dichotomy between the auditor guideline, which allows you to do risk assessment, and the same guideline by EPA on duty to notify that says as long as you're just over that criteria, you've got to notify. It's quite strange. Sorry, I've got into another topic.
Yeah, I pushed Liz on that point, and I think she gave a very good explanation that it's not quite as black and white. So I mean, she there's timing involved, and there's reasonable expectation that it remains like that. So I learned a lot on that podcast.
Me too. Yeah, me too. And the migration potential, etc.
Mm.
So the podcasts are good.
Thank you.
I really think you're doing a great job, both of you. And I think you're getting good traction. It'd be interesting to see if you can hit a wider audience of regulators as well.
We do get feedback now and then and some of them are from within the EPA, usually not on their official EPA email address, but saying, look, trust us, we're listening.
Yeah.
And some of them are from councils. And we are super stoked about the reach we have. We will never have in the hundreds of thousands of downloads because we are such a small industry and our target audience is very small. But it has gotten to the point when I show up at I don't know, the ALS Christmas party, that people actually walk up to me and say, hey, I recognize you and thank you for what you're doing. And that is always so unbelievably rewarding. And you saying that you're listening to it and you have learned something is it's one of the best things I've heard in a long time. Thank you, Rod.
Gunnar, thanks. And James, I'm not surprised that he was busy. Next time I invite him to lunch, I expect him to be there on time.
We will. And thank you. Thank you again. It's been great chatting.
All right. See you.